Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and those watching along. This is essentially a roundtable talk down debrief, if you like, about the work we did on the Dia Garcia case, specifically the criminal side. Sorry, first of all, I'm Sanjay Vasani. I'm the lead solicitor for this case. I'm the director at Duncan Lewis City Office, our office. Got with us today John Salter, who's a senior caseworker and been taking the lead with a lot of the preparatory work on this file. Just say hi, John.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
And we've also got Alexandra Mitu, who's joined Duncan Lewis as a legal intern, who's worked specifically on this case, and again has been helping myself and John with a lot of the preparation which has gone on. Alex, say hi.
Hi, everyone.
And finally, we've got our man in Havana, as it were, Matthew Humphreys, who is a High Court advocate at Duncan Lewis. He was lead counsel on this case, and he's joining us live and direct from his accommodation in Dia Garcia of the British Indian Ocean Territory. Matthew?
Well, I'll say good afternoon because I'm on Indian Ocean time.
Okay. So this is a case which has had quite a lot of interest, and we thought it might be a good idea to pull some voices together and give people who have been interested in knowing a bit more an outline. You'll understand if we can't go into the legal intricacies of our client and the cases. And has to be said, there's still ongoing litigation with our public law colleagues. So this is going to be generic, but hopefully it will give people an insight into sort of the work we've done, how we've done it, the challenges we've had, and our views on the case, because it is interesting. It's, as far as we know, one of the first situations, first of its kind situations where a civilian firm has acted in a criminal case of this nature, and there is something to be said about what's happened here and what's been achieved. Just to give those listening and watching a sense of the background, the litigation really concerns originally a group of 89 people, 20 of which were children. I think the number's down to 59 adults now and 15 children, who were persecuted historically in Sri Lanka, and many of whom traveled to India, were treated in many ways as second-class citizens, not allowed to vote, not allowed to work, not having the rights that you might ordinarily enjoy, and who finally made the decision to take the ambitious step of building and boarding a boat, making their way to Canada, the other side of the world, to seek asylum in the West. Despite their best efforts, their boat ran into distress in October 2021, and they were towed to Diego Garcia, which is a coral atoll. It's the largest island in the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean. It was formerly part of Mauritius for a long period of time, but I think since 1966, it's been referred to as the British Indian Ocean Territory, and the island forms part of that. It's its distinct legal entity, its own constitution, own laws, own penal code. It has a population at any given time of about 4,000, mostly military personnel, UK, US personnel. No civilian population, no civilian infrastructure at all. But the British and the Americans have been there a while, so they've made themselves a bit more comfortable. So there's things like shopping and bars and gyms, swimming pools, things of that nature. But unfortunately, the people who have made their way from Sri Lanka have been housed in essentially a tent city, if you like. It's a small encampment, and they've been there for nearly 2 years, not more. until their asylum claims have been determined. And they're in a bit of a limbo, a legal limbo in many ways. The island is governed by a senior civil servant called the commissioner. He wears all sorts of hats. He's the chief magistrate. He's a coroner. He's obviously a military commander, and it's governed for the British Bar anyway through the Foreign Office. There is quite a complex factual legal history to the island. I'd encourage those who are interested to go away, maybe look at the Supreme Court judgment from the British Indian Ocean Territory, which was issued in May 2023. That sets out some of the background to what's happened with these individuals. But the upshot of that of those proceedings in which Duncan Lewis acted is that there was a declaration by that court, which is the highest court for that territory, that the individuals detained on the island were eligible for legal aid, both civil and criminal. Again, that was a case where there was, it was work that hadn't been done before, so there's quite a lot of paralleling. And what the claimant's argument was, what Duncan Lewis argued on behalf of our clients in that case, was that there should be equivalency to the Legal Aid Sentencing Punishment Offenders Act 2012, which gives scope to civil and criminal legal aid in this country, and that should apply to the refugees on Diego Garcia, and the court agreed. And on the back of that, we've become involved because the position had been somewhat murky before that. I think it's fair to say there was a concession in those proceedings that it was within the gift of the commissioner to grant funding for lawyers, but I don't believe anybody ever knew that until the case was being litigated. So what was probably happening before, which I think we know rhetorically, and Matthew I think maybe knows a bit more about this, is that the Public Defender Service, who were paid for by the Ministry of Justice in this country, were being instructed and were representing any such clients facing criminal prosecutions under the Penal Code from the UK via remote connection. And I think by and large, most of them were being pleaded out. Obviously don't want to say too much there, but that's the impression we got. Nobody was having trials. Certainly nobody was going over there to have trials. And that's, I think, certainly a first. And Matthew might well be the first civilian lawyer to go over there and to do that. Just bring Matthew in there. Is that right? Is that what you heard when you were on the island?
Well, yeah, I've asked a couple of people on the island, and the chap who is effectively the prosecutor here, his technical title is the principal legal advisor, says that all the people he's spoken to, some of them have been around much longer than him, say it's the first time they can remember a lawyer coming at it for a trial.
Okay. That was certainly the impression I got when this case came to me. So the case came through my long-standing friend and colleague Raja Urathria Vinay Nagan. He's a senior public law solicitor in Duncan Lewis with connections to Sri Lankan diaspora. There was, I think, reach out from the refugees on the island to civilian firms and especially Sri Lankan lawyers, and that's how Duncan Lewis, I think, first came to be involved. In briefly, there's obviously a bit more to it than that, but in summary, that's, I think, how we got the case. And then he was advised by our client that he had been sent a charge sheet, or I think it was a summons, wasn't it, Matthew? Essentially saying that he was to appear in court. There's two cases that we dealt with, but the first to be prosecuted was an arson, but that was the second in time. The first in time, second prosecuted, was a sexual assault alleged to have taken place on behalf of by our client against another female refugee on the island. The arson occurred on the 15th of June 2023, and the sexual assault said to have occurred on in January 2023. There weren't interviews, as we would know them, police interviews, I think, for either case. So what happened was the criminal team were emailed by public law colleagues and asked if we wanted to get involved. And I have to say I was a bit reluctant at the beginning because it's not something which we'd ever done before. Of a case which we weren't quite sure how we were gonna be involved, how we were gonna be able to do our work that we might ordinarily do. If we were standing in court shoulder to shoulder with our client, and also big questions and marks about how we were going to be paid on the case. So there was a bit of reluctance, but we did in the end work it out, and we got involved. And that's where I think firstly Matthew and Jonathan's stepped up and said that they'd be willing to help and get involved. But we had some initial challenges, didn't we? So the first one, maybe I'll hand over to you guys now, was practicing, because you need a special license, don't you, Matthew, to be able to practice in BIOT. Do you want to just talk us through how that went?
Yeah, so what we found out on, and I think it may have been Raja and the public law guys may have given us some guidance on this. There's a registrar who's actually a lawyer at a commercial firm in London. We had to apply through them and demonstrate that we were of good standing in the legal profession in England and Wales. And that, as I recall, took a little bit of time to come through, because it turned out that the registrar was on leave, and we were sort of chasing somebody who wasn't actually in the office getting our emails. But we eventually got all that sorted out, and kind of took it from there.
But I mean, it was a problem, though, wasn't it? Because there was, and I think John dealt with this. There was some police interviews that we were asked to be involved in, and which we couldn't because we didn't have the right to practice in BIOT.
That's right. I think they wanted to interview on the sexual assault allegations. I think during the period when we were waiting for our license to practice to actually come through, we had to basically say, well, sorry, we're not going to be able to assist at this stage. He was given the option of the public defender service, and it sounds like they just ended up not actually being an interview at all.
Well, that's right, and we did ask them, to give us some time, and we did chase that license. But I mean, it's almost a bit of a hardship on him, because he may well have had something to say in that interview, and the officer investigating unfortunately wasn't prepared to wait for us to get that license. It came through, I think, not long thereafter, and by that point I think we'd already started to work on the arson handling. And I think you were having conversations with the prosecutor, because one of the first things we were looking at was whether there was a possibility of making representations on this case. And do you want to just talk a bit about that and the thinking that went on about whether what their view was and what we were saying?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it became pretty clear very early on, from talking to Raja and the public guys, that the client certainly had quite serious mental health issues, and something that is very clear in the BIOT penal code is that there is an insanity defence. There is a point where somebody with very, very serious mental health issues can be deemed not to be criminally responsible. So we were looking at going down that road and sort of saying, do you really want to bother prosecuting this guy? And then we had a whole bunch of, as you were saying, we had a whole bunch of problems getting the legal aid for the It's me. We had getting the legal aid for the psychiatrist to produce a report.
Yeah, I mean, well, before that, I think it was even because it was unclear how, even though we were technically in scope and legal aid, how those applications were made. Because John, if you want to maybe just come in on this, the in this country, you'd obviously do an application, on the legal aid portal. You'd satisfy the interest of justice criteria. You'd satisfy the your means, and then you put an application for legal aid. We weren't even sure how it was done over in BOE, and we had to sort of well, it was sort of trial and error, I guess, in some ways with the BO admin. Do you remember your dealings with them and how we managed to get funding certificates, if that's what you want to call them?
Yes, I mean the initial sort of investigation that I'd conducted when first approached about this was that it was just a straightforward CRM 14 and 15, the interests of justice and means. It then became apparent with a bit more sort of investigation that in fact wasn't the case, and that we had to approach the administrators at Diego Garcia to fund any sort of action that we were proposing to take. And that took an inordinate amount of time to even get that off the ground, simply because they were very hesitant to allow us to have access to public funds, and seemed far more in keeping with using the public defender service rather than an external firm of solicitors. So it did take a lot of time and a lot of toing and froing with them to secure the funding, but eventually we were able to show that obviously it's the client's right to have whichever firm of solicitors that he chooses, and indeed we had no vested interest in the matter save for defending our client.
I think I remember this actually, because one of the issues we had with them was we weren't necessarily talking the same language. They obviously were citing LASPO to us, which is all good and well, but that's the act which gives scope. It doesn't govern the rates or how you might fund advocacy or attendance or waiting or travel, all those things that we would do. So it was, I think essentially we asked whether we could act as you might do, for publicly funded extradition proceedings, that being perhaps the nearest equivalent, and do like a certificate for assigned counsel for Matthew's work, and put in a claim for a CRM 7 as you might for equivalent sort of work in this country. I think we got there in the end. I think they sort of agreed the rates, and well, we'll see when we obviously come to put this bill in, I guess. But it sort of was a bit, hit and miss, I guess. But one of the other things I think Matthew said there was disbursements. So I think you had a lot of trouble, didn't you, with psychiatric funding? And there was a psychiatrist that we use quite a bit, Dr. Patel. Do you want to just talk us through what happened there?
Yes, so it was decided that an external psychiatrist was needed. We tried to source one through the various different means that we have. Unfortunately, a lot of people were reluctant to get involved simply because of the logistical nightmare that it proves trying to communicate with our client in Diego Garcia. So much so that psychiatrists, as obviously as their right, they slightly inflated their quotes to cater for the extra work that was going to be necessary. Unfortunately, the administrative people on the island decided that it was outside of the scope that they were quoting from LASPO, and therefore refused any sort of application that we made for additional funding for the psychiatrists. So we had to really rely upon a very trusted individual who very kindly sort of lowered his fee to incorporate what they were quoting us. It all became a bit of a mad rush in the end, simply because of timing. But fortunately, we were sort of able to get things agreed and done in advance of the trials.
Yeah. And I think, Alex, just bring you in there, because you dealt with some of this, didn't you? We were obviously preparing the materials for the psychiatrist we did actually use. But in the meantime, I think the default position was that we'd have to rely on the prosecution to instruct an expert for us. That's right, isn't it? And we didn't have control of the remit of what they were being asked to report on, or whether we were happy with the way in which that process was being done. We were relying on them, which was a bit odd. I think, Matthew, again, bring you in. You dealt with that too. Do you remember some of the work you did on that, Alex?
Yeah, that's right. So we had to gather all the different documents that we had on the client's medical history, look at all the different witness proofs, and all the documents that we had received, everything that was relevant to the psychiatrist to assess ahead of the interview with the client. But also we, like you said, because there was the possibility of only having to rely on the prosecution's report, we were looking to see how all the evidence that we had was aligning with the report that they would provide to us.
Yeah, and as you know, Alex, the psychiatrists only report back on their assessment with the client, and obviously what we provide them. And if we're relying on the prosecution providing materials, they may not have everything that we do. Certainly not confidential materials, our proof, for example, our medical notes, other psychologist reports, for example, that come into our hands. But you saw an awful lot of paperwork, didn't you, in that exercise? I think it was thousands and thousands of pages which you had to go through to have enough to instruct our psychiatrist.
Yeah, that's correct. So we had over 4,000 pages of documents that we had to go through to and sort through to decide which were relevant. I think the other thing that would be worth noting was that when we saw the prosecution psychiatrist report, there were notes on the documents that they had received before the assessment. And many of the documents that we produced to the psychiatrists that we instructed hadn't been provided to them, such as the client's medical records and a few other documents that we thought were relevant.
Just going back to documents, because despite the fact that our client had been there since 2021, there's actually an awful lot of material which had been gathered in that time, wasn't there, on him in terms of his assessments by mental health professionals, physicians, risk assessments. Do you want to talk us through what you saw and all the sort of things that we'd managed to gather?
Yeah, exactly. So there were a set of from the hospitals that treated the clients. So he attempted suicide a number of times, and he was taken to a hospital, and we had all of the reports that attested to that. He had a number of breakdown episodes, again, some of which were documented and were subject to the review. We also saw some documents from the from some of the Sri Lankan authorities related to his persecution back in Sri Lanka. So again, they were supporting his PTSD case and the mental health issues that he was going through. And we also had a psychologist report, and again, quite a detailed document that was talking to the PTSD symptoms that the client was going through, and how his time on the island and the trial that he was now subject to was making those conditions worse for him.
And Matthew, just to bring you in on this one, because if anyone who's wondering why all that work was necessary, I suppose predominantly it was to do with the arson allegation, because it was suggested that certainly by our client that he set fire to that Medivac tent, belonged to I think the USA. They valued it at something like $22,000 or something. But it was an attempt at self-immolation, wasn't it? He was trying to take his own life at that point. you want to just help us with that and what we understood and why that work was so crucial?
Well, yeah, I mean that was the thing. He was saying he didn't dispute actually setting the tent on fire. He was saying that at that point suicidal because of the PTSD and the situation he was going through, and that what he was trying to do was actually end his own life. That was what was sort of in his mind at the time, was to end his own life, as opposed to just destroying the tent just for the sake of it. And that's why the psychiatric evidence was so important, because I mean, looking at the two different reports, I think the main distinction between them is that the defence expert, probably from having more access to medical records and so forth, does go quite a bit further in terms of exploring the issue of PTSD, and actually is verging on making a formal diagnosis to that effect, whereas the Crown expert is quite sort of, I don't want to say non-committal, but that doesn't reach a clear conclusion either way on the matter.
And Alex, there was certain triggers, weren't there, for our client? Uniforms, and in particular his relationship with the island's commissioner, and how that impacted on him, and what we had to do on his behalf to help him, with that process. Do you want to just talk us through some of the things that we were hearing?
Correct, yeah. So just for background, his PTSD symptoms were primarily related to a sexual abuse episode he had back in Sri Lanka. And he was abused there by the Sri Lankan army, which led then to his family fleeing and moving to India, where again it didn't really continue to be much easier for them. But essentially, that's what then led to his PTSD symptoms worsening whilst on the island, because seeing uniformed officers all around him, and then being subject to confinement and other similar behavior that was reminding him of the time in Sri Lanka and the sexual abuse episode, worsened these symptoms for him. Further to that, there were also claims of verbal abuse from some of the army staff on the island towards him, language being used as to how him and would be treated if they died on the island, all of which worsened these symptoms for him, to the point where he felt like he just would rather take his own life than wait and die and be buried on the island.
And it was especially, Matthew, wasn't it? I think site of the commissioner, and there was a recusal application which we needed to make early on, wasn't there? Do you want to just assist us with what happened there?
Yes, well, I think the Royal Navy commander on the island, I think, is actually the commissioner's representative, to be exact.
Okay.
The commissioner, I believe, is in London and or wherever. But the Royal Navy commander is, as I say, the commissioner's representative, but is also the sole first instance magistrate based on the island. So when anyone is charged under the civilian penal code as opposed to military discipline offences, the starting point is that the commander is the person who hears the case. Now, although the commander, as I understand it, was always dressing in civilian clothes when he was dealing with court proceedings, the client had seen him in military uniform on other occasions, and was expressing serious, rightly or wrongly, expressing sort of animosity because of that, and thinking he wouldn't get a fair hearing. And I did do what we call a recusal application, which is for when you ask a particular magistrate or a particular judge to step aside from hearing the case. Now, I don't think we were ever told we were never sort of formally told he accepted that application. But he did say shortly afterwards that he wasn't going to deal with any further hearings in the proceedings, and it then went to what is called the senior magistrate, who is a judge typically based in London, who I guess essentially comes over and deals with cases when he needs to, when there's when for one reason or another the commander can't deal with the case.
Was it part of your application, or was it something that we learned through our client? But there was a particular conversation, wasn't there, about disposal of bodies and what might happen if any of the refugees were to die on the island, which was of particular concern for our client as to why he perhaps shouldn't be the judge in his case.
Well, yes, I mean, as our client tells it, it was expressed that they would simply be buried on the island without any kind of ceremony whatsoever. And I think our client was sort of in his mind relating that back to things he'd been told in Sri Lanka when he was having issues with the military there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I suppose obviously we did prepare the trial, and obviously we're not getting into the ins and outs of how that happened, but you did eventually fly out. That wasn't again straightforward, was it? That took some wrangling with the BO admin, but we got some flights. Do you want to just talk us through how that went and your journey?
Yeah, so it actually all got quite complicated, because I think in terms of the funding for me actually coming out here, all that ended up not being agreed until I think it was about a week before I needed to fly out. And so as a result of that, in the space of the Monday and Tuesday, the week before I came out, my head was just spinning at one point because of various things all needing to be agreed and coming into place. But having already got the license to practice here sorted out, it then became clear that because of the rules about who can come to the island, because typically the only people here are Royal Navy, US Navy, or there are, I think, a small number of civilians who are involved with the running of the sort of infrastructure that's here, the shops and restaurants and whatever else that's here for the really to provide leisure services for the military who are stationed here. So I had to make an application for what they call exceptional to visit the island. And I had to show that there was some sort of necessary purpose for me to work on the island. Of course, they don't give any clue of how they define what's deemed to be necessary. So that was a case of explaining that there's a trial going on here, at least one trial, potentially two trials, in which I was the defendant's representative, and that I needed to be physically present and in court for those purposes. And all of that actually was accepted quite quickly, in contrast to some of the other stuff. But they then asked me to agree to a number of restrictions, which I guess come from security concerns. And to be fair, you've got to bear in mind it's a naval base. So I haven't been able to go to the beach.
Well, when you asked for to stretch your legs, what happened? Go and share that with us.
So, well, let me tell you what I can do. What I can do is go around and literally walk around the accommodation. When I was going to court, I had to be. So I am the principal legal advisor who was prosecuting the case, who's actually staying in the room next to me in the accommodation, it turns out. We would both walk back and forth together. The rest of the time, when I want to go anywhere, as in visit the client from the cove, particularly the encampment, there's a very nice guy from G4S who was involved with the running of the encampment, sort of essentially guarding the refugees, who comes and drives me wherever I need to go. So he's been driving me back and forth to the camp and walking me back and forth to the supermarket that I am allowed to visit. And he also runs back and forth bringing meals to my room at the accommodation. So I did have this just quite casual conversation with the prosecutor before court one morning, saying that I was concerned about the lack of exercise. And he just quite eerily, I thought, not really taking it in, goes, "Oh, really? Oh, okay. Let me make a couple of calls about that later." So then after court later in the day, I'm back in my room and, to be honest, forgotten about the whole conversation. He had a knock on my door. There's a couple of guys from the police force outside, and the prosecutor standing outside his room next door, laughing his head off. And the police officers had bought
You've got to
which I don't know how well you can see. That is basically an exercise bike that looks like it's been pulled out of the gym somewhere. So they've taken, in fairness to them, taken quite seriously my concern about lack of exercise.
So it's far from an all expenses paid beach holiday, isn't it? You've kind of been sort of stuck in your room a bit, and
So I've been stuck in the room a lot of the time. But yeah, apart from that, I've got an HD TV set. The only channels you can get on there are American Forces TV. So there's a American Forces Network, I think. So you've got AFN Prime, which is a mix of soap operas and quiz shows and God knows what else from all the American channels. AFN News is a mix of CNN, Fox News, and the news bulletins from the big American broadcast channels. And there's a couple of AFN sports channels, which is a mix of American football and basketball and Christ knows what else.
how far's your
good?
how
Good
far,
news is you can sort of start streaming on your phone and kind of get it onto the cast it onto the TV screen. So I haven't been entirely stuck with just the American stuff.
is it a like a hotel accommodation, or is it a place you've got in the barracks, or what's your set as far as you can see?
It's not a barracks. It's run by what do they call it? Navy. Hang on, I've got it up over there. 1 second. Navy Gateway Inns and Suites.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of blocks that appear to be quite similar. It's basically just a little studio room. I don't know how well you can see all of this. I've got my own apartment in there.
Okay.
There are some slightly bigger rooms apparently with their own kitchenettes, which are for the officers. But as far as I understand it, most people here are in some of the rooms to this, as far as I understand it.
And just talk us through how you've been allowed access to the client, because he's in a place called Thunder Cove, isn't he, where the camp is set up?
He's in, yeah, the camp is in a place called Thunder Cove, which is the other end of the island. Everyone's been in a bunch of tents, with the exception that our client, for some of the time, and only some of the time, back in his own tent, our client has been kept isolated in what I understand is effectively a disused laundrette, because G4S, because not just because of the sexual assault allegations, I think because of his mental health generally, G4S wanted to separate him out and just be able to keep a bit more of an eye on him. As far as the criminal proceedings were concerned, he agreed as part of his bail that he would stay in that room if G4S requested it. It was on the understanding that it had to be temporary and just for sort of welfare reasons. I believe, as I understand it, it has been found as part of the public law proceedings that that room is not suitable, certainly long term, as accommodation for anyone. So it was said temporarily as part of his bail that he could be held there.
And what about the trial itself? Was there a courtroom, or how was that set up?
Driven me down to Thunder Cove, and it is, I would guess, it is a good 3 miles. It is completely the other end of the island from. So I've been driven down there. The client was brought into what I believe is a sort of disused chapel. It's the same place they've been bringing him when we've had video conferences with him from London. And there's literally just a meeting room in there, as a table and chairs for him, myself, and the interpreter. And they were just leaving us in that room and basically just waiting outside for us. So there was private conferences there. The courtroom is inside. I don't know the technical term, but it's effectively the HQ for the island. It's where the Royal Navy commander is, and I assume the American brass all are. And there's a room that was, I don't know what it's normally used as. There's a room where the desks are all just turned around to be a makeshift courtroom, and the Biot military sort of seal was taken down off the wall, and they put a crest up, like the royal crest, like we would have in a courtroom in England, with the medieval royal motto on the bottom.
Okay. Well, I mean, you finished the trial now. Obviously, our case was dealt with. Perhaps it's a good place to maybe just get some final thoughts from everyone on their impressions of the case and what they think was achieved here. John, do you want to start with us?
It's been somewhat of a privilege to be involved in this groundbreaking stuff. There are obviously still things being asked out in terms of how the island polices itself and the legal intricacies of how they deal with people who aren't military. Regrettably, it's something that I think will take a considerable amount of time for them to sort of address. But in terms of the work that we did, it's something that I think we can all be extremely proud of. And even in the faces of somewhat strong administrative adversity, we were able to do what we set out to achieve, and what our company logo and slogan says. So, from my point of view, I think it's been a very worthwhile and very credible piece of work that we've all undertaken.
Thanks, John. And Alex, I know you've joined Duncan Lewis, for this case in particular. How have you found working on it and your experience?
Sorry, I lost you there for a second. Do you mind just repeating the
I was
question?
just saying, because you've obviously joined Duncan Lewis as part of our internship program for this case in particular. What's your experience been of working on it, and how have you found it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really great working with the team, and I'm very thankful for all the support I have received. And I think definitely, a very interesting and important case for all the reasons that we've discussed. It's I think we've all tried to do the best we could to support the client in this difficult trial, to understand his situation, and understand, obviously, and help him understand how the law applied to his actions. I feel like we all did the best we could to support the best outcome that he could have gotten from this, really.
Thanks, Alex. And final word, Matthew, do you want to share some thoughts about your experience? I know your experience is still ongoing, and it will still be ongoing for the next 3 or 4 days until you're back home. But how's it been working on this one?
Well, yeah, it's been a privilege, I have to say. It's an absolute career highlight so far. Also, I know the public law guys are coming out here in a few weeks to try and resolve the wider issue with the refugees. Feel it's a terrible shame they've all found themselves in this situation. The administration here are just, it's not necessarily it's not the administration's fault. They're just not set up to deal with having a bunch of refugees here. No one really envisaged this situation, and it's just a shame that they haven't been able to be shipped out to England or somewhere for their claims, asylum claims, to be dealt with there. But we'll see what comes of it all, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right, and just echo, I think, what you've all said. Tough case, something that none of us have ever seen before. A lot of trial and error, and doing things for the first time. But we made it work. I couldn't be prouder of you guys. You did smashing. Thank you for all your efforts. And we went 6,000 miles to a legal black hole. And as I think John said, we gave someone a voice. And yeah, it's definitely a career highlight for me. And it's one which I know people have been interested in hearing about. And hopefully this session has given those who have taken interest a little bit of insight. So thank you all for joining. Thank you guys for your contributions. Matthew, have a safe flight. Get home safe. We'll see you in the office Monday. Other than that, I'll let you go. Thanks, guys.
I took Monday off.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, okay. Well, enjoy your annual leave. See you Tuesday.
Thanks, everyone.